Om, Om, Om Hari Om, Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvina Aditamastu, Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om, may the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. So, good morning and welcome, everyone.
Morning, Brother Shankara. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, dear. So good to hear your voice, Haima. So, we're studying Swami Prabhavananda's book, Realizing God. And this book is a collection of his talks. We're talking about mysticism and mystic consciousness. And we're well along in the talk. And so we'll start with this. I'll start with just a phrase. When you have known the peace that passeth all understanding, in Sanskrit, when you have realized Nirvikalpa Samadhi, there is pure, unified consciousness. The person who is well established in this consciousness is said to be illumined, even though that mind is dissolved in Brahman. That person is fully awake, but free from the ignorance of the waking life. So I'm going to repeat that. After having realized Brahman, even though that mind is dissolved in Brahman, that person is fully awake, but free from the ignorance of the waking life. That person is fully conscious, but free from any craving. Such a person is said to be free, even in this life. For that person, the sorrows of this world are over. Though that person possesses a finite body, he remains united with the infinite. That heart knows no anxiety. Such a person is said to be free, even in this life. Now, we cannot, sitting here this morning, any of us really conceive of what that state of Jivan Mukta is. It isn't because we're somehow bad and wrong. No, just exactly the opposite. We're striving, we're making progress toward that state. But having been in the presence of those who have realized and become illumined, I can tell you that they are different. They just simply don't behave in the same way that we do, because there is no, as it said, no anxiety, no doubt and fear, no sorrow. Though their body, as Swami Prabhavananda's was, at the end of his life, though the body was seriously afflicted. And at times he complained of it to his attendants, just like Sri Ramakrishna complained of his broken arm and later of his cancer of the throat. But there is no experience of separation from that divine consciousness at any time, even though there may be some anguish about the particular affliction of the body. So before we go on, is there any question or comment about what's been said?
So even the thought that one could achieve that state is so comforting.
Yes.
The question is that in Sachidananda there is only bliss. So the suffering aspect is a part of the duality or Maya, but Maya is the power of Sachidanand. So what happens to the suffering or the evil from in the transition?
Well, there is a wonderful explanation of it at the end of Adi Shankaracharya's Vivekachudamani, the crest jewel of discrimination. Sri Ramakrishna said that all of these seeming paradoxes resolve themselves even when you achieve savikalpa samadhi, the knowledge of God that comes, that somehow there is no separation, no division. Satchidananda, Maya, Shakti, they are one and the same thing. And just exactly what that means, I'll leave you to read what Adi Shankaracharya says in the Vivekachudamani, the last couple of chapters, and also what you find in the Master's commentaries on these things in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Particularly, you can read chapter 5, which starts on page 132, and see what he has to say.
Thank you. I will do that.
Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara, this is Fred.
Yes, Fred.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I just have to say that in my case, my current connection with the divine seems to be greatly affected by illness. And I assume, physical illness. There is I'm developing some immunity to emotional stresses and strains and internal states. But the actual physical illness really does seem to affect me. And I get, it's nice to know that that state, a better state can be obtained.
Well, toward the end of his life, Fred, thank you for that. Toward the end of his life, the Swami who sent me here, my Upaguru, Swami Swahananda, toward the end of his life, he said to his doctors, there were three, he said to his doctors, whatever you do not let me be in pain. And because of the distraction. And so they were very mindful of that. Even those who are very close to or have crossed the line, they do not want to be distracted by their prarabdha karma, the part of their the part of Maya that brought them into this life. That's why I suggest reading the last couple of chapters of, well, reading it all for that matter, but especially the last couple of chapters of Adi Shankaracharya's Crest Jewel of Discrimination, Vivekachudamani, because he explains as carefully as he can that even the illumined have their prarabdha karma, have this karma that brought them into this physical form to experience. And they must, even those must be alert not to be distracted by it. Thank you, Fred. And yes, it is illness and all of the things that are attendant on it, pain, weakness, lack of energy, all that is quite distracting.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, Robert.
I like it. It seems to me that once you recognize or realize what is truly and really important in life, the direction that you're going, then that is where your attention will lie. Why be concerned and let your feathers get ruffled about something that is not the principal goal or object or whatever you want to call it, thing in life?
Well, Robert, who can argue with what you said? Absolutely, that's true. But, you know, the god of death has, as it says in the scriptures, can scowl at us terribly and afflict us with what our prarabdha karma is. And so there's no judgment to be made on anyone who becomes momentarily distracted or even somewhat more than momentarily distracted by the what happens with this physical frame. It's very hard to be indifferent to those afflictions, especially pain and and the feeling of total lack of energy. And on the last part, the lack of energy, I can speak very personally from the last few months' experience. It's troubling, and one doesn't want it to be troubling, but nevertheless it is, because it's so difficult to do things. And so you're absolutely right, Robert.
I don't think anyone ever said any of it is easy. But if we're here, the evolution of man leads directly to that.
Yes.
And once you are approaching that and recognize what that is and realize that you are approaching that to go in any other direction would be contradictory to everything that we stand for, everything that we believe in.
Yes, and that's why it's so troubling. When one finds oneself going in another direction, that's why it's found to be so troubling. We know exactly what you're saying is true, and yet,
But that's what this class is about. This is what that temple over there is about. This is what meditation is about. This is what all of these things, all of these are tools that help us to maintain our direction.
as I said, Robert, you're right.
And to respond to what Robert said about life not being easy, during my soul searching days, I actually talked to a Christian priest about that. And he said something profound. He said, no, life is not easy, and God never said it would be easy. But if you pray to him for strength, he will give you the strength to get through it. I found that to be pretty true to this day.
Well, here we all are on a Saturday at shortly after noon, because we have that strength and we have that grit. We have not been pulled away and sunk into the distractions.
Right. And speaking of which, Nirvikalpa Samadhi sounds so wonderful, but we don't know the amount of effort of our sadhanas that it will require to achieve it, because our past lives come into account as well, the efforts then. Is that correct? I mean, we know you can't say, well, it's going to take you 10 years or 20 years, because
Nirvikalpa Samadhi is not something that you do as the result of effort, Brahmadas. As Patanjali very correctly points out, I say very correctly because it agrees with so much other that has been written and said by those who have the right to write and say those things. It's something that happens to you. Once you've achieved Savikalpa Samadhi and begin to abide in the state that arises because of the Savikalpa Samadhi, the knowledge that provided, that everything else is peripheral, then, as Patanjali points out, the last two limbs of yoga, that final samadhi, nirvikalpa samadhi, and liberation, or kaivalya, as it is said in Sanskrit, independence, is something that happens to you. So at that point, then this is why I say it's instructive to read the last couple of chapters of the Vivekachudamani, because Adi Shankaracharya explains about what you just mentioned, the fact of our past lives, all that prarabdha karma continues to afflict, both positively and negatively, the physical.
Right. It's a mixed deck.
Yeah. So there isn't any contradiction. It's not a question of there being a contradiction. It's simply both things exist at once, as long as we are in the realm of Maya. As long as we have a physical form, and there is that appearance of separation. It's a dream, but it's a very powerful dream because it's Brahman's dream.
Also, Brother Shankara, this is Haima.
Yes, Haima.
The book How to Know God also explains how to reach those steps on Nirvikalpa Samadhi, how to reach to that
Yes.
point.
Oh,
It
yes.
explains very clearly, Prabhavananda, Swami Prabhavananda, he explained very clearly there too.
Swami Prabhavananda talks about what Patanjali says.
How to get there.
Yeah.
Haima, what book was that? I might take a look.
How to Know God. It's in our library.
Oh, yes,
I
yes,
bought
I've
it.
read that. Yes, okay.
Okay. That's a great book to understand these steps, how to get to Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's a feeling, like Brother Shankara said. It's not something you can achieve in a year or two or months.
No,
Right, Brother Shankara?
absolutely not.
Right. And also, I think ego drops to those people who achieved that. Their ego is wiped off and they are at a very subtle state, right, Brother Shankara? If I'm
Well, it's inexpressible to say
calm state.
how they really are.
Yes.
There is that aspect of their prarabdha karma, but what the knowledge of Brahman is, to become one with Brahman, which is the outcome of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's not. This is why Jesus spoke of it as the peace that passeth all understanding. No concept, no thought, no speech can express it. But its reality is more powerful than any other aspect of reality.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
I think being able to come to a state of complete surrender would be so useful. But the difficulty is getting to that surrender and being able to give up this doership that just nags.
That's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. In this Waking from Maya spell part 2. What it means to surrender the dream. And so you're right. You're right. You know, it's not called Mahamaya for nothing. It is Brahman's dream, and therefore it has the power of Shakti. The Brahman's powers, one name for it is Shakti. And it is very powerful indeed. The thing to remember, as Krishna points out, it's not something that is done to us. We are part of that which is dreaming it. That is the deep essence of us. And so it just continues to be, the left mind continues to want to provide explanations and all these thoughts, whereas, as you just pointed out, Smile, it is the surrender of all that allows us to be in the presence of that which is. But all those are just sound like platitudes as we sit and talk about them. What does that mean? Well, we only find out when we find out. And it'll happen at exactly the right time. This is exactly what Sri Ramakrishna says. It does not serve us at all to be impatient. It's just another form of distraction and aversion.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
Hari Om.
Hari
A
Om.
while ago, we spoke of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It's not something that we try or plan. It happens by grace. But coming from that place, personally, I feel that everything, just about everything in my life is grace. even going to the puja room or having inspiration to do puja, even that is not my will, even that is a grace.
Yes,
After a point in time, the will loses not only its significance, but the very name itself. Everything becomes grace. Whatever is happening around me all the time.
well, that is the surrender that Swayam was talking about. To really live that, to abide in that way of, to abide in that frame of reference, to abide in that way of being, is that surrender. It means you've surrendered the idea that there is any such thing as free will, that free will is part of the dream, and that it is all an expression of God's will, or, as you use the word, grace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brother Shankara,
Yes,
you mentioned that Sri Ramakrishna said that it is not helpful to be impatient. But did he not also have his awakening upon the impatience of wanting nothing more than to wake up? And he looked at the sword of Mother Kali, and that's when he woke up, when he was heading towards the sword. And isn't that impatience? Isn't that what happened with him?
no, that's not impatience.
Okay.
That's uh, that that desire to be free from that intense ache of separation.
Okay.
Uh, it's a very subtle thing, Josh. You're right. The difference between expectation and impatience is very subtle, because the left mind continues to make all this conversation about it. But if you read not so much what's in the gospel about it, but read what's in the great master or the divine play about the master's spiritual journey, his sadhana, we find he was not impatient. He was childlike. He just said, Mother, how can you keep me separate from you? How can you be apart from me? Why are you not a reality for me? By impatience, I mean the feeling that something is wrong, most particularly that we are doing something wrong, and beating ourselves up for that.
Yes, I've also struggled with that episode because Sri Ramakrishna, to my understanding, took Kali's scimitar and was ready to kill himself. Yet he also
he was,
says,
as Josh said, he was headed toward it. He hadn't actually grasped it yet. But yes, what were you saying, Ramadas?
oh yes, and he also says that to commit suicide is a heinous sin at another point in the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, yet he was ready to kill himself at one. I've always struggled with that.
Well,
He said it's a heinous sin, yet he was willing to do it, you know?
Well, this is one of those paradoxes that resolves itself, it is said. We cannot judge the actions of an avatar, of an incarnation. And we cannot compare ourselves to them or think that what is so for us is so for them. We simply can't.
Right. It's very difficult for us to understand their actions.
Well, beyond it's beyond difficult. It's actually impossible.
Right. Swami Yogashananda once told me it would be like a dog trying to understand why a human does the things he does. We just don't have the capacity.
Yes, but what happens is, Sri Ramakrishna says that once you have that experience of savikalpa samadhi, there comes a different kind of understanding in which these paradoxes and contradictions just no longer seem relevant at all. They resolve themselves in that sense of unity that's all part of this yes and no, dark and light of Maya, which is a play of lesser truth.
Yes.
Shankara,
Yes, Vijay.
2 items. One, a moment ago we were speaking of Thakur trying to end himself. First, we have to remember at what stage of his spirituality did that thought occur to him. Second, in what context? The context in this case was that, Mother, one more day has gone by and I have not seen you yet. That desperation for God vision. It was not because of anything else, worldly or material, that caused him to think even of that action.
These are wonderful explanations, Vijay. We may or may not accept them. We may or may not agree with you, and that's all fine. The left mind comes up with all of these explanations and recollections of what's said and our understanding of them, and not to disagree with you in any way. But that's one way of seeing it.
The second item, a while ago, we were speaking of impatience. The word impatience came in. Once we accept that somebody has reached the stage of high spiritual attainment, who am I to be able to contain within my limited walls and say with any adjective, is a person being impatient or angry or what the motive behind that action was? Keeping in mind, for example, in the letters of Swami Vivekananda ji, Swamiji's letters, there are a few letters where he appears very angry at his brother Swamis. At one place, he even said that I've done all I can do. I've collected all the money that I can. I've given it to you. Now it is for you, and you guys are not doing what you're supposed to do. And a whole lot of kind of anger coming out. But who am I to use the word adjective anger? I don't know in using that language what he was trying to achieve actually.
We understand what we understand, Vijay, when we read such things. That's all we can do, is we can understand it from where we are. The higher and higher level of truth that we assimilate and thereby and abide in, we understand these things differently. But I don't think that any of us sitting here this afternoon can pretend that we understand the actions or words of an Ishwarakoti. As Sri Ramakrishna said, Narendra, Swami Vivekananda was. So, again, all of what you say is wonderfully reasoned and wonderfully well thought out. That's characteristic of you. Just exactly how accurately it represents Vivekananda, who of us can say? So, anything else, dears? All right, we'll read on. Sri Ramakrishna would go into this Nirvikalpa Samadhi many times every day. Think of that. This I heard from my master, Swami Brahmananda, who lived with the master and saw this day in and day out. Sri Ramakrishna would go into this Nirvikalpa Samadhi many times every day. Think of that. This I heard from my master. Generally, if you go into that, you are through. And then again, when he returned to normal consciousness, he would speak of God, God the Mother, his chosen aspect of God did not lose its reality because he had known Brahman. Thus, Sri Ramakrishna showed how the divine aspects of the chosen ideal are also the real. All the avatars keep a certain amount of separation in order to teach mankind. My master told me one time, at times I see God playing, wearing so many masks. Then how can I teach? Then again, I come down to the normal plane and see your weaknesses and defects, and I try to correct them. This is that completely paradoxical truth expressed by Swami Brahmananda, Rakal Maharaj. Each of us is God playing. Each of us is the divine being enjoying, I'll say enjoying, what it is that we brought about. But if we are on the path to liberation, then there are impediments, which the Swami speaks about as imperfections, defects. And so he helps us to correct them. To be a true mystic, 3 conditions are necessary. The first is human birth. The next is the longing for God, for liberation. The third is the grace of a guru, a holy man. Now, referring to what Vijay said earlier about grace, there is only one guru, but as human beings, we experience them as sometimes, most often, as another human being, either someone writing something or a holy person that we can be in the presence of. That is a guru for us. But if you poke them, if you poke any one of them, they will say, I am only a face. I am only a spokesperson for the divine. How does a teacher teach? not by words merely, because the truth of God is transmitted in silence. In the Upanishads we read, to many it is not given to hear of the Atman. Many, though they hear of it, do not understand it. Wonderful is he who speaks of it. Intelligent is he who learns of it. Blessed is he who, taught by a good teacher, is able to understand. And those are the steps. First, hearing, then assimilating, and then finally, understanding. Because the understanding goes beyond intellect. In the West, a distinction is made between religion and mysticism. That religion is a faith, a belief in certain dogmas or creeds and doctrines, certain rites and ceremonies, while mysticism is the belief that God can be known and realized. And this is emphatically so in the Roman Catholic and Russian Orthodox traditions. You see this dualism. In India, we make no distinction. Religion means not faith or belief in dogmas or doctrines, even in God, but to realize God. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that in the Hindu almanac, there is the forecast of how many inches of rain will fall in the year. You can squeeze that almanac, but not a drop of water falls. Coincidentally, I just read that in the Gospel this morning. I'll repeat that. Ramakrishna used to say that in the Hindu almanac, there is the forecast of how many inches of rain will fall in the year. You can squeeze that almanac, but not a drop of water falls. Lectures and religious talks do not give you religion, but they can give you the urge to experience. And of course, that's why what we're doing this afternoon is discussed the way it is. We're doing this together. We're encouraging one another to do what is necessary to have the experience. So at this point, any other thoughts? Anything to contribute from your wisdom? Anything that you'd like to add or ask?
Yeah, back to the meditation. I had an experience yesterday during the 3 p.m. meditation where I got an idea for a solution to a tough technical problem I had been struggling with all week. And when I finished the meditation, I tried it and it really worked. And I was wondering, was this my subconscious, or was I just thinking of it in a different way, or was perhaps God communicating with me during meditation? Does God perhaps communicate with us during our meditations? Because we're kind of going in deep, and perhaps he can. I don't know.
You can put it that way. You can put it that way, Brahmadas, that it is a communication from God. But the way Einstein talked about it was the answer is self-evident, but you cannot find the answer with the mind that created it, created the question, created the need for that answer. So when your mind changes, as it does in meditation, and a different mind emerges, the self-evident is there. Swami Vivekananda explains this very beautifully, both in two places. Once in one place is the introduction. It's either the introduction or the preface to Raja Yoga. Another place is in the powers of the mind, which refers to much of the same material. So, does God speak to us? Well, over and over, the great teachers of mysticism tell us there is only one voice. The voice that we hear in our left minds is just one reflection of that, fragmented by the distractions, doubts, and fears that are part of the left mind experience. When we leave that behind in meditation and have access to the right mind or the heart, as Einstein said, something changes and the answer is self-evident. That's why he never claimed any real authorship of any of the things that he wrote down. His effort was to bring his mind to the state where the truth would be self-evident, and then he would use his left mind to write it down. So what you experienced is something that everyone who practices meditation or even concentration will sometimes experience. Another time we'll do it is when we're asleep. When something is troubling us, something that we need to resolve is troubling us, and we'll wake up with the answer. The reason being that the mind which created that concern or question was diverted, and another mind emerged that in which the answer was self-evident. This is one of the things that two self terms are characteristic of the true sadhaka, the true spiritual aspirant. One is self-determination. They do not allow the expectations of society or other people to determine how they will live their lives and what they will do with their time. And they are seeking the self-evident, the truth that is always there, as Vivekananda pointed out. The truth is always there. It's just behind the screen of our dualistic way of being. When that is set aside in yoga sleep, yoga nidra, which is one way of talking about meditation, or the way of being when we are asleep and unconscious. We say unconscious, actually the consciousness is always there. So self-determined and seeking the self-evident. Thank you, Brahmadas. Anything else from anyone?
The last few things that you said, Brother Shankara, are so, it really touched me. So I'm going to repeat it just so that it gets, or paraphrase you. One is self-determination, not to let the dictates of others or society tell one how to lead your life. And number two, to be at it, to seek what is self-evident. Am I correct? Did I understand?
Yes, yes. That we're trying to get all the obstructions out of the way so that what is self-evident becomes clear to us.
Brother Shankara, could
Yes.
you expand on the second one, how we seek the self-evident?
Well, all
I
of the
mean,
great teachers will tell you that the truth is already there. As Christ said, know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. He doesn't say that the truth gets delivered to you in a package. If you read the rest of his teachings, he says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you, all knowledge and all righteousness. And so the true spiritual aspirant is seeking what is already there, is already true, is self-evident. Self being the operative word. Self-evident. True of the self. But we don't see it because of our distractions, particularly our doubts and our fears that are constantly rotating and revising themselves in our left mind. As Scrooge said on Christmas morning after he had awakened, or actually it was the next day after Christmas, and his clerk came to work and he had some things to say to him. The clerk's name was Bob Cratchit. And he called him into his office and he began to say some truths that he had realized. And one of the things that he said is, I have not taken leave of my senses, Bob. I have come to them. And by that he means that the distractions of the doubts and the fears and his past experiences were out of the way. And what was true, what is true, was self-evident. Does that get it, Nira?
yes, thank you.
Brother Shankara,
Yes.
speaking of self-evident, yes, it's a very powerful word. I believe that if my mind, if I'm conscious of things around me, I believe that everything is self-evident. However, in my day-to-day life, it is because I'm not looking at things with the same eye, with the same feeling of consciousness, that there are things that are not self-evident. And that takes me to a strange paradox. If everything is self-evident, then at what stage would I or anyone decide if what I'm doing should I pursue or not? And a case in my mind right now is the development of the atomic power. Oppenheimer, when he was successful coming up with atomic bomb, and he was startled as to, oh, what have I done? He actually felt very negative at that time. Something became very self-evident to him, that something that he was working so hard on, what it led to. So the word self-evident at that time arrived to him after his achievement. But even during achievement, there were things that would have been self-evident. Does that mean that a person should not pursue that direction?
That's far too complex a question, Vijay, to answer. It depends on so many factors. The state of the things that it primarily depends on are the state of awareness and consciousness of the person and what it is that they're attempting. This is why we're taught over and over: practice contemplation, concentration, and meditation. And the answers to these things will come to you. They will become self-evident. And this is why it's said then, that being the case, you cannot put a foot wrong. You become like an expert dancer that cannot put a foot wrong. But one would have to be, excuse me, there apparently our lawn care people have come. So they're making noise outside, and I want to close the door. I'll be right back. But the final answer to your question, Vijay, is that whether or not we do something, are we the doer? Sri Krishna says no. Sri Ramakrishna says no. God alone is the doer. We are the witness. This aspect of us that sits here this morning is the witness. And so,
I gather from it, Brother Shankara, that Oppenheimer, if he had that, I mean, I don't know whether he had that or not, because if he had a feeling of self-surrender throughout the process, then he wouldn't have any regrets.
well, this is the difficulty about talking about particular cases like Oppenheimer's. None of us know that much about Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
We know that he was a very deep and broad man. He knew about the Hindu ideas.
Oh.
And when he witnessed the first atom bomb explode, he said, "Oh my God, we have become Shiva, the destroyer, the transformer." So, to consider the case of Oppenheimer, whether he should or should not have done what he did, I mean, it is absolutely an academic question, not a spiritual question.
Oh.
All we know from a spiritual point of view is what happened.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Brother Shankara,
We have just a few minutes left, so let's take it in comments and questions.
I do have a question, Brother Shankara.
Yes.
The word, when you were talking about mystics and mysticism, somehow my mind connected to Sadhguru and to one of his talks and about becoming inclusive. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on how do we become inclusive to something that we are averse to, rather than pushing away. How can we include that which we are averse?
The first thought that will be useful to us is that attractions and aversions are distractions. They're a way for the left mind to occupy itself with trying to get what pleases the action and experience suit and avoid that which causes pain to the action and experience suit. The second thought that is useful to us is God alone is the doer, and we are the witness. We are both, as the divine presence, we are both the doer and the witness. But the jiva is not the doer. That which breathes is not the doer. It is the instrument of the doer. And so our attempts to avoid that what we do not like, who's doing that avoidance? And do we need to have a reason for it? It's just so hard for us to divorce ourselves from the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions of the left mind. We, as the divine being, created it in order to experience this world, this universe, this Maya. I am one, I shall body myself forth as many. So our attempt to do this or that is better served by our focusing on our spiritual practices that bring us more and more into that witness position of simply saying, this is what the divine is doing. And I, as the divine, who wanted this to happen, I mean the whole thing, not, any particular instance, as I said, we don't understand karma. It's too complicated. But any particular instance, so that's happening. I witness both the happening, I witness the actions and reactions of the action and experience suit, the jiva. And we soldier on. But there is no definitive answer to any particular instance other than that which we discover in meditation.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Brother Shankara,
Yes?
just need a clarification. It's hard in daily life to constantly discriminate, and yet I have to use my left mind for discrimination, to see what I accept and what I don't want to accept, what seems the right thing. What I'm getting to is I have so much faith and I feel blessed being part of Ramakrishna Mission Order. I have so much faith in my teachers, the Swamis, in yourself. What I'm hearing is all blessed and beautiful. At the same time, in our lives, we come across people who are revered and who at times it seems portray themselves as higher than others at a higher ground, and they have a lot of following, and I'm not going to name any of them right now, and heard the people kind of advertising for them to recruit other people. What I have in my mind, a specific example where somebody said in a lecture, somebody calling himself profound or portraying himself profound said to the audience, I can read your mind. It's a very powerful statement, attacking or affecting the minds of the audience. And we have to guard ourselves using our discrimination not to be taken, not to be swayed away. Just a comment. Thank you.
Yes, we have to be careful about who we listen to, no question. On the other hand, Vivekananda said, not to his audience, but to his associate, who was his secretary. Swamiji was once addressing a group of people in New York and was very deep into the talk. And he suddenly left the stage. There was a door behind the rostrum, and he suddenly just turned and went through that door. And his associate followed him and said, Swamiji, what happened? And Swamiji said, I was overpowering their free will. That is not my intention. And it is never the intention of the divine to overpower our sense of having a free will. He said, I was overpowering their free will. That is not my intention. And so I stopped. So, are there people who can read our minds? Apparently so. Do we know who they are? Maybe, maybe not. But if we have an aversion to the idea that our minds can be read, then we would want to avoid the presence or being in the presence of anyone who says they can read our mind. That's all I know to say about that, BJ.
Thank you so much. Really, it helps.
Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
if I may ask, how was your appointment on Thursday? Any updates or?
Yes. Plan B for open heart surgery is off the table because of the characteristics of my heart. It's not an option for the cardiologists. But they do have options, as the cardiologist said, Dr. Iravanian said, they have options C, D, and E that they are actively considering. not only among themselves, the cardiology group at Kaiser, but they have become associated with and have apparently a very collegial relationship with the cardiologists of the Emory cardiology group. And so they discuss all their cases together, apparently. And so the case of what needs to happen with this heart will be discussed among that. And they will get back to me. I have a telephone conference by his scheduling, his staff scheduling. I have a telephone conference with Dr. Iravanyan on September 30th. And they'll say what's what. The numbers for me, the visit, and the stuff that's gathered about your vitals and so on Thursday were all very good. Blood pressure, weight, respiration, blood oxygen, and just experientially, empirically, I'm feeling a good deal better. Not because of anything Dr. Iravanyan has done. There's nothing new in that department, but because of adjustments made by Dr. Pandya, the cardiologist that is in charge of my case, so to speak. He made some adjustments in the meds. So just exactly what will happen next is up to a crowd of extremely qualified women and men who are part of those two cardiology groups, the Emory group and the Kaiser group. And so they'll be making a recommendation. And whatever it is, I'm sure it will be enthusiastically cooperated with from here.
Brother Shankara,
Yes,
you are very dear to us, extremely dear to us. And what I heard a moment ago, on one hand, is reassuring. On the other hand, the fact that I do not have any background of what you have gone through recently kind of makes me feel a void. Is it possible, if you only feel right about it, to give me only a 30-second background on what happened recently that led to these appointments?
well, this has been going on for some time, BJ. There's been, the condition is called congestive heart failure. The reasons for it are atrial fibrillation and the fact that the two ventricles of my heart do not beat synchronously. And so this has a lot of, this produces a lot of symptoms that are collectively known as congestive heart failure. And you can look that up online without my trying to explain it. My understanding is imperfect to start with. But this is what they're treating me for, congestive heart failure. And it's a product of any number of different factors over a lifetime, maybe more than one lifetime. So
Thank you very much.
that's all I can really tell you, Vijay.
Thank you, really.
And let me say that you all are very dear to this. You all are very dear to me.
We'll be praying for you. You'll be in our meditation.
Thank you, dear.
Please.
As Swami Prabhavananda said, prayer, and he triple underlined this, prayer does make a difference.
Thank you so much for being a part of all of us.
Anything else from anyone?
Great news, Brother Shankara.
Thank you.
Brother Shankara, I remember the prayer that you have taught, that you are the source of infinite energy, fill me with the energy, you're the source of infinite strength, grant me that strength, endow me with the strength, you're the source of infinite courage, inspire me with that courage, and you are the source of infinite fortitude, grant me that fortitude.
Yes. Well, that was actually, I don't know how ancient that is and what it's a translation from, but it was one of the favorite prayers of Swami Swahananda, the Swami who sent me here.
Brother Shankara, I would really like to have that prayer. If you can tell me where I can find it, or if you can text me. Or
It's in one of the recent talks. Just go to the notes for one of the recent, for the last. I don't think it's in the last one, the one on waking. No, it's not in Waking from Maya spell. But go to the talks just before the August break. I think you'll find it. Swayam, do you know where to find it?
I just have memorized it, and I'll be happy to share whatever I
Okay,
remember of it.
would you share that with Nira then?
Sure.
BJ.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
I will.
Thank you.
Anything else, dears? Something just popped up as a chat on the bottom of the screen. I don't know whether it was from Cindy or who it was from, but something was said there.
I think it's just people leaving, saying goodbye.
Ah, okay.
Somebody just joined just now.
Oh,
So maybe that's right.
well, welcome, and we're just about to say goodbye. So, Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful. May you have peace of mind. Go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our Mother and Father. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. So until tomorrow morning, for those of you who decide to join us, the talk will be on part 2 of Waking from Maya's Spell, because of the wonderful discussion we had last week about what was said. We're only about halfway finished with what was envisioned as that full presentation. So there's, as if you go and read on the website or the Facebook page or in the newsletter, you'll see what it is we're going to talk about.
Thank you, Brother Shankara. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Please take care, Brother Shankara.
Thank you, dear.
Thank you. Hari Om. Thank you.
Hari Om to everyone.
Hari Om.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.